Tonight, my topic, actually, I wanted to ask you a question that maybe, I'm not sure this has happened to you before. Depending how often you get to interact with unbelievers, which I know for many of you, maybe at work or at school or in your neighborhood, you might interact with people who don't believe in God. Maybe they profess to follow him, but it's pretty clear by the fruit in their lives they are not actively following him. Have you ever, in an interaction with an unbeliever, had them bring the Bible up to you? Not you saying, let me share with you the reason for the hope I have, like Peter writes about, but where they actually bring up to you as an argument for whatever reason it may be, but they bring up to you for some purpose, good or bad. Has it happened to you before? Probably all of us, right? Doesn't the Bible say this? Or why are Christians like that, right? We do hear that. It happens to me quite a bit. And then most of you know the work that I do at Created Equal. We're primarily on college campuses talking to students about abortion with the goal of influencing how they think and feel about it so that they would think and feel rightly, to know that it is wrong, and also to recognize not only in their head intellectually it's wrong, but have the same gut instinct reaction, recoiling away from it in the same way we all recoil from things like sex trafficking. It ought to be the same. We know it's wrong intellectually, and in our gut we feel that it's wrong as well. But sometimes people walking by talking to us will bring up the Bible. When that happens, I'm always very intrigued by it. And often it might just be ignorance, right? They might say something like, well, the Bible never mentions the word abortion, which is true, but I always just say, well, hang on a second. It doesn't say Trinity, right? You don't have to mention the word for the concept to not be there or for the condemnation of something not to be in there. Sometimes it's just ignorance like that, but other times you find someone who has some kind of base knowledge of the Bible, like they maybe went to church for a while, and they know some things. They might not really understand it well, but they have some knowledge of what the Bible says. And that can be kind of surprising when that happens, because they come at you very, at least in my line of work, sometimes not always very eager to see me on their campus. And a couple years ago, we were in Florida for the Justice Ride, which leaves in about a month and a half or so. It goes back to Florida, and I was on the campus of University of Florida one day when I was standing by the signs, and I don't know, maybe someone was there. I don't know if you were there that year, Natalie, but some group came walking through, just shouting at us and saying, I cannot wait for the day that you die and you go to the pearly gates and you are turned away because he never knew you. I thought, well, that's a really biblical phrase. Not many unbelievers know he never knew you, right? That tells me she probably had some familiarity, maybe had been for a while going to a church. But she kept insisting, you will burn for this. What salt of the earth is this? What witness is this? You will burn because of this, because he never knew you. When I, of course, asked her if she wanted to talk about it, she did not. She said, no, I think you should kill yourself instead. So she was not eager for a conversation. But what this tells me, and this I think we all recognize here, we live in a culture that for long has held on to the trappings of religion, the trappings of Christianity, while not actually believing in the God who is the God of the Bible. We still have some knowledge of it, though. And people who often are not following our God like to use the Bible to defend their own ideas or even to attack our God. And when that happens, it's good for us to be prepared to know how to respond. But what's going on, I think, in this situation is that people, again, are tossing out phrases, just like tossing out, people sometimes say, we need, again, separation of church and state. They don't know what that doctrine is about protecting the church from the state. They merely know the phrase and have a new understanding of it and just kind of toss it out there. The same thing's happening here. This girl at Florida didn't really know the understanding of what it means for God not to know you, what it means to follow God. She had the idea in her mind, the phrase there, and reinterpreted it for her own purposes, and that's what's often going on here. Now, when I'm doing this in my line of work, often what I will hear people do with this is they use the Bible to argue, like you see on the screen. They argue the Bible is actually pro-abortion. According to the Bible, abortion is not only permissible, but actually can be a moral good in many circumstances. And I know most of us, if not all of us here, would reject that idea. But tonight what I want to do is look at 3 times I hear often in my line of work, people bring the Bible forward as evidence for their views that the Bible is actually in support of abortion, that God himself is pro-abortion. And I have 2 main reasons why I want to do this. First of all, I think it's good when we hear these things to listen and understand, because we want to be good readers of the Bible, right? God revealed himself in the Word. We may not enjoy reading, but we must read because our God has revealed himself that way. Reading is not always easy. A couple years ago tried to read a Charles Dickens novel, and it was great. I loved it, but at first I was thinking, this is really, really hard. It's not what I'm used to reading. I haven't cultivated that ability to listen to his long, winding sentences and really understand them. So if you don't practice at it, it's very challenging to read the Bible well. And one way to learn to read it well is to look at those who read it really poorly and find out what they've done so badly and how they've read the Bible and twisted it. Looking at how they twist it, we can think about, well, here are the principles of interpretation they are breaking. So I want to look tonight at these three passages used by students to argue the Bible is pro-abortion to, first of all, help all of us grow in our ability to read the Bible well. This should be one of our primary endeavors as Christians. We want to not only yearn for God, but take the revelations given to us, feed on it, meditate on it, and learn about him as he has revealed himself. So this will be to help us all grow in our ability to read the Bible well. And secondly, in a week and a half, we're going to have Honor Sanctity of Human Life Sunday here at Crosspoint, a day that many churches across the nation dedicate to preborn babies at risk of death by abortion, talking about how to help parents who are considering abortion. If these people that I meet on campus are right, if the Bible is actually pro-abortion, we as a church ought to be very embarrassed for having an event, a day honored to these babies and to their parents. We ought to instead have a day to celebrate abortion. And frankly, a lot of churches in America do that, have days to celebrate abortion. So it's good to look at these arguments because if it's true, the Bible is pro-abortion, that means a lot for what we have thought in our minds incorrectly. Now, spoiler alert, all these are wrong. The Bible is not pro-abortion. And if you saw my heading, I actually hesitated putting this on the back there because the heading of my paper says for our notes tonight, the Bible is pro-abortion, but underneath very small print, failures of biblical interpretation. I thought, what if someone walks in here, sees that and runs out the door like we're chasing away the people who want to be here? So I will pass this out in a moment. I didn't want to leave it on the back there for you to get terrified of what I'd be talking about tonight. That's where we're going though. Three arguments from the Bible that people put forward as reasons for which the Bible is pro-abortion. We're going to look at them and ask if those are good or bad interpretations, and our purposes are to grow in our reading overall of the Bible and also to respond to their claims because they're making a pretty big charge here that God is pro-abortion. We ought to know how to respond to that. That's where we're going. I'll pass this out, and then we can dive in. I'll just give you guys, you can start passing them out behind you. Thank you. Take one, pass it on. All right, so what I want to begin with is this first one I hear. So there are three arguments I often hear when someone references the Bible. I'm going to go in the order of commonness I hear them. The most common one I hear on campus is, for example, was at Bowling Green State University a couple years ago. A crowd of students around me, and some kid walked up and said, hey, the Bible says that life begins at first breath. And I thought, okay. I asked it, what would you ask someone if they told you that? What would your question be? What? Where, exactly. I said, where in the Bible does it say that? And he said, he used some choice words for me. I will not use it. I said, I don't blank and know. Okay, you're making the statement. You should defend it. This is a simple burden of proof fallacy to say, here's my idea. When you ask for the proof, they say, I don't know. You prove me wrong. That's a fallacy there. It's a bad way of thinking. You make the claim, you got to defend it. So I just asked him to defend the claim. He couldn't. But then another student in the crowd came to his defense, started Googling really fast on her phone, and she found it. Can you think what she might be what they're referring to? Life begins at first breath. Any ideas what that might refer to? Exactly, yeah, Adam. Okay, so what I did was they referred to Adam. I said, let's get our Bibles, because you guys referenced it. They, of course, started laughing. But they're the ones who said the Bible, right? So they didn't want to actually read it. But let's look together. We're going to look at the creation of Adam. This is the first argument used on campus I hear for why the Bible is allegedly pro-abortion. Genesis 2, verse 7. Very familiar to all of us. We're going to read it. We're going to do two things with each of these passages. First, we're going to ask, what if they're right and how they've read the Bible? We're not going to begin by critiquing their interpretation. We'll get there. We're going to start by saying, what if they're right and how they're reading the Bible? Would that mean that abortion is okay? Would that justify abortion? And then secondly, we'll ask, what about their interpretation? Are they reading the Bible correctly? Those are two things we'll do. So first of all, Genesis 2:7, this is the creation of Adam. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. All right, so you can see here clearly that God breathed into Adam the breath of life, and Adam became a living creature. The conclusion here is that humans are not alive or at least not living persons, not living meaningful lives worth protecting until they're able to breathe. Now, hold on to your hermeneutical sirens go off in your head like, that's a bad way to read the Bible. I know that. We're going to get there in a moment. But first, just pause and say, what if they're right? What if it's true that humans become alive once they're breathing? Would that justify abortion? Abortion being the idea that it is permissible at any point in pregnancy to purposely kill the preborn baby. If humans come alive or are persons once they can breathe, would abortion be okay? What do you think? Any ideas? When we breathe, what are we receiving? Air, oxygen, right? So the question is, when does the baby receive oxygen? Anyone know? Actually, it was really quite early, right? Placental transfer, the baby's getting oxygen from the mother. Now, if you were to say that, they say, hang on a second, baby is getting oxygen. They might say, well, not breathing independently. And that's true, right? The baby's not breathing independently. Baby's getting oxygen from mom, depends on mom for her oxygen. So the baby will breathe independently after birth. But if you have to breathe independently, not just get oxygen, but breathe independently to be a meaningful person, to be a living creature, well, that means preemies who have distress or newborns with distress need to have their lungs suctioned out. They would not be living persons, not alive. Adults on ventilators need that support for breathing, would not be alive. At least some very uncomfortable conclusions, right? So either if it's true that just getting oxygen makes you a living person, and that's what was important for Adam, well then pretty early on in the first trimester, babies are getting that, and abortion's wrong at that point. Or the other option is it's okay to kill people on ventilators, okay to kill preemies who can't breathe, or newborn babies under distress. Pro-abortion people don't really like that, though. So really, this argument's not a very good one anyway. It doesn't really it doesn't do what they want it to do. Either abortion's wrong really early, or they have to allow the killing of a lot of born people too who need support for breathing, and that's not really comfortable for them. So this argument pretty quickly fails to do what the abortion advocate wants it to do. But more importantly for us tonight, it's worth asking, is this a good way to read Genesis 2:7? What are your thoughts when they say that we read this passage here, God made Adam from dust, he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, Adam became a living creature. Is it fair to apply that to how we understand humans come to be in general? Is that a good, Jackie's saying no. Why do you say no, Jackie? Adam was not born. There's something unique about his creation, right? Adam's a unique instance. It's really interesting to me. I always find this very fascinating. People refer very often to Adam and say, well, God breathed in Adam's nostrils. He became a living creature, so we must breathe in to become living creatures. No one has ever told me anywhere on campus I've ever been to, they've never said, you've got to have someone's rib taken from them to come to be. The very next person is made that way, right? Eve is made when God puts Adam to sleep, takes a rib, and makes Eve. No one's ever told me, don't all women come to be by the rib from their future husband? No one's ever argued that. Why don't they argue that? Because we know Eve's creation was unique. It wasn't normative for all of us. And it's just an absurd idea, right? No one would argue that every female comes to be from her future husband's rib. What if she never gets married? How did the single woman come to be? She doesn't have a future husband who has a rib, right? It's just a weird idea. Adam's creation is a unique story. Now, we know there are various genres of literature in the Bible, right? You look at the Bible, one of the reasons it's hard to read it is there's a lot of different kinds of texts in here. We have historical narratives. What else do we have in the Bible? What kind of text do we have in here? What is Psalms? What is poetry, right? Poetry. We have proverbs, these sayings. We have shorter fiction stories, parables of Jesus. We have prophecy, yes. We have straight didactic teachings. Do this, don't do that, right? So you have a lot of different kinds of literature. Adam's creation is a narrative. It doesn't mean it's irrelevant, unimportant. But we have to be careful. Narrative is not necessarily normative, right? Something may be descriptive, describe what happened, without being prescriptive for how all things normally happen. So Adam's creation is a narrative is not normative for us. You might think of, for example, in Acts, the book of Acts, the early church. They didn't meet in churches like this, right? Where did they meet? Anyone know in the book of Acts? Where were they meeting, the early church? Not in big buildings made like this, but in some homes, right? Now that's true. It's a narrative. You should not get that description of the early church. You should not go from there to say, therefore, we must all meet in homes. It's wrong for us to meet in a building like this. That narrative is descriptive, not prescriptive, not saying we must also do that likewise. We have to be very careful reading a narrative not to say because that happened then, that's how it must happen for us. And in Genesis, it's very, very clear early on. After Adam, you get Eve, and then after that pattern, it established clearly how humans come to be. Genesis 4 begins very clearly. Adam knew his wife Eve, and then she conceives and gives birth to Cain. There's no creating him out of dust or anything like that. He's created through the same way that every other human who is mere human who comes to be has been made, through the fusion of a self from the male and the female. That's normative. Adam's story is unique. It's not normative for us. This is pretty easy to demonstrate, right? Because again, we read this, I think we automatically know that. We know narrative, important. We can learn a lot about God here, about humankind, but we ought not say that's normative for us. We get that. People who are just giving a quick reading of the Bible don't often. And so we have to, so one way, when I was at Bowling Green that day, I just kind of responded by saying, when I read this text, it's interesting. I said, there's a kind of a crowd there. I said, raise your hand, please, for me. Were any of you formed from dust? No hands went up. But Adam was made from dust. They proved by that acknowledgement that their creation was different from Adam's. This is a unique story, not normative for all of us. I think pretty quickly this argument fails to justify abortion. It also fails as a way to read the Bible. And we ought to be very careful when we read the Bible not to overlook the different genres in there. It doesn't mean any is less important, but it means you ought to follow the rules of how you read that kind of a text. Is it a poem? Is a didactic straight teaching? Is a narrative? That will dictate how you read it, how you make sense of it. We don't want to abuse the Bible by twisting it into ways the authors did not intend. Any questions or clarifications on the Adam account or that argument there? Yeah, Don. Interesting. Yeah, that's a really good, correct, a good point, observation. This text says God breathed into Adam. They're saying when the baby takes her own breath, which is not the same thing. Yeah, excellent point. Great point, Don. Yeah, Sally. Sure. Well, I do think there's something more going on here than merely getting oxygen in Adam's lungs, right? This is more than that. The breath of life encompasses more than merely he comes to be at that point. We know that humankind are different from the rest of creation. We're made in God's image, so there's probably more we could unpack there. So that's a great note as well, Sally. You said it's good? No. Oh, yeah, sorry. Could you hear Steve? Yeah, thanks. Do I see that? I mean, the word is not there, is it? Right. I mean, clearly, right. So man is not merely a living thing like plants. He's not even an animal. Animals who have, some personality, animation, unlike a tree, there's a difference there. There's something even differenter about us. Differenter, that's not a word, is it? More different, because we're made in God's image is now. Yeah, made in God's image. All right, let's go on to the second one, the Mosaic Law. Now, this is the second most common one I hear. People will come to me and say, have you ever heard that passage in Exodus? Which, this is really funny when people who probably have not read Exodus like to refer to it. And they say, in the Mosaic Law, the baby and mom are not equal. Now, please, for the first time ever to be said, Crosspoint Church, do not open your Bibles. Because, and you'll find out why I'm saying this in a moment here. This passage they're referring to, I want you to read it off the screen or in your notes, not from your own Bibles, because I want you to see what they're seeing in this. When you read the passage, it does present on the surface, some problems for us. If our view is abortion is wrong because God made all humans in his image, that's not just male. We know it's clear in Genesis 1, male and female. So the whole class of humankind is made in his image. If we get that, that means also not just those who are over 10 years old or whatever age, all of us, includes preborn babies, we're saying all of us are equal. Their argument here is that actually in Exodus, there's a passage showing that is not true. Born human, preborn human are not equal. So I want you to see what they're seeing from how they read it. So it's in your notes, but also on the screen. This is a New Revised Standard Version. This is in Exodus 21. When people who are fighting injure a pregnant woman so that there is a miscarriage and yet no further harm follows, The one responsible shall be fined what the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Stripe for stripe. All right, the key word here being miscarriage. So, two men are fighting. The pregnant woman there, she is struck. There's a miscarriage. Baby dies. There's a fine. But if there's harm, perhaps to the mom, it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The conclusion here is that clearly there are different fines based on who you're harming. Harm the preborn baby, it's merely a fine. You harm the mom, it's lex talionis, the law of retribution, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So clearly, they conclude, according to the Mosaic law here, baby and mom are not equal. Now, this is very uncomfortable for someone like me, who has dedicated years to fighting abortion, to see perhaps, according to them, when I read this, I see what they're saying here. It appears the baby is not being treated the same way as the mother. We're going to come back again to the more important question, is this a good way to read the Bible? But I want to first of all, before we treat that question, again ask, what if they're right? What if it's true, if there is a fine for harming the baby, for killing the baby, and eye for eye, tooth for tooth for harming the mom? What if that's true? What if they're reading correctly? Would that justify abortion by which men and women go to facilities to pay to have their children killed? No, you're exactly right. I agree with you. Why not? Okay. Yeah, so what's happening here? They're fighting and accidentally killed, right? It's irrelevant to intentional killing. Nothing is said here about intentionally killing anyone. At best, what we have is a fine for unintentionally killing the baby, whereas unintentionally harming the mom has a different fine, right? Or a different penalty. But nothing said anywhere about what you do when you choose to kill someone. So you're exactly right. Also, take note of what happens when the baby dies, according to this reading. What happens to the person? What do they have to do? Pay a what? A fine, right? They're not celebrated. There's still a penalty, right? So you can't say, this is God saying, yea and amen, you may kill preborn babies. They're assessing a penalty when the baby is killed. So you can't get from this fine, a penalty for miscarriage, to saying you may at will go and kill your baby. Clearly, at minimum, still there is a wrong thing happening here. Even if the penalty is different, still something wrong is happening because a fine has still been assessed. And so you cannot get from this jump, this unintentional killing, where there's a fine, to you may at will kill someone. It is not intentionally killing in this passage, and still it is a wrong thing to do. So this does not justify abortion. But still we have to ask, and we want to, of course, ask the other question, which is this a good way to read this passage? Now, I tipped my hand earlier by saying close your Bibles. Open it now. Someone please open your Bibles. What translations do you have out there? Someone read, what do you have? Would you please read NIV? Would someone read ESV for us as well? Does anyone have the NASB? Perfect, Lisa. And you have KJV, right, Tim? Of course. So let's read those different versions, see what they say. Let's start with what does NIV say, if you would please? If you have it. Exodus 21, 22 to 20. Actually, the key one, yeah, just verse 21 should be enough, I think. 22, sorry, thank you. Thank you. You can pause there. Did you catch the difference? Massive difference, right? Miscarriage, premature birth are not the same thing, right? So really interesting. Let's do ESV. Who had ESV? I can't remember who had it. Does someone have it? Thank you, Don.
When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm.
You can pause there. Thank you. So her children come out, but there is no harm. So again, the idea is premature birth, but no harm. There's still going to be a fine because premature birth is still dangerous for mom and baby. There's a fine. But if there's harm, then it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Interesting. What else do we have, Lisa, NASB?
It's actually similar to the NIV. If men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And do the KJV?
So that her fruit depart.
Yeah.
Strive and hurt a woman with child so that her fruit depart from her.
Her fruit being her children, so they depart, but nothing said about baby being dead. So what's really interesting, when you have these totally different readings, what do? How do you find out which is right? The idea is, what'd you do? Well, you could just kind of look at like the numbers. What's the majority say, right? Now, I don't know how great BibleGateway.com is for like seeing the overall general English translations, but when I was studying this, I found that the majority, the more said born premature. 29 on BibleGateway.com said born premature. 14 said miscarry. So it's more that say born premature, but it's not enough that I could say, well, clearly it's just a fringe that says miscarry, but still the majority do say born premature. So you can first ask, which is the more common translation? You could also ask, does anything in the context of the verse itself demand a certain option? Like if it says the baby comes out premature and flesh is eaten away and is not moving, that would clearly suggest a miscarriage, right? Nothing here suggests that. We have the baby comes out, or the word miscarriage, but nothing here demands we make miscarriage our translation choice. So you can also look at the words that are used. In your notes, I have two key words there, yeled and yatzah. Yeled being the word for children, and yatzah for comes out. I always forget my dots and lines on that word. You could do a study by this. You would look at the word and say, first thing to do, ask is, okay, these words, how does the same author, being Moses here, how does Moses use this word in as close of a context as possible, right? So ideally in Exodus, or if not in Exodus, maybe throughout the rest of the Pentateuch, how does he use this word? And you'd find a couple of things that are, for the yeled, it's not very helpful. Yeled, I have in your notes there, it often just means, for the idea conveys child or children. So it's used in Exodus 1, 17, 18 for Hebrew children. In Exodus 2, 3, and 6 through 10, Moses himself is a child. It's the same word. And the children of slaves in Exodus 21, 4. So Hebrew children, Moses himself, and the children of slaves. So this word conveys the idea of child. You're not getting anything clearly here that the child is dead. Yatzah, Moses uses that 94 times in Exodus alone. He used it 348 times, almost 350 throughout the Pentateuch, being the first section of the Bible. And when this word usually conveys the idea of an emergence of a living thing. In Exodus 3, 10 through 12, it's used for the Hebrews when they come out of Egypt. They're coming out. It's that verb. They're coming out of Egypt, coming out alive, clearly. In Exodus 5:20, it's Moses and Aaron when they come away from Pharaoh. So it's generally these living things come out, come away, emerge in some way. So again, nothing here so far suggests this must be a dead baby coming out here. It is never used by Moses for miscarriage, specifically miscarriage. Moses does use this word one time for a stillborn child. In Numbers 12, if you recall, Miriam, her skin is leprous, and Aaron pleads with Moses, plead to God on her behalf. And in Numbers 12:12, Aaron says to Moses, don't let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away. And that coming out from its mother's womb is the same verb, yatzah. But in that verse, it's very clear that he says, with its flesh half eaten away. That makes it clear it's the emergence of a dead baby. That's why we conclude miscarriage is the word that should be used there. Now, interestingly, Moses did have a word for miscarriage. He didn't use it in Exodus 21. The word is, if any of you like Hebrew, it's shachol. I'm not good at my Hebrew pronunciation. Sorry, these markers are really bad. He could have used this word. He didn't use this word, interestingly. He used this in Exodus 23, where God promises no miscarriage would happen. In Genesis 31, the goats are miscarrying. It's the same word here, miscarriage, shachol, which he does not use in Exodus 21. So in summary, you have more translations saying born premature than saying miscarry. There is nothing contextually in the verse that says we should assume the baby's dead. Moses had a word for miscarriage he didn't use, and the words themselves are usually used for children and emergence of a living thing. So probably most likely this should be read as the emergence of a living baby born premature. So the best way to read Exodus 21 is actually a total opposite of what the pro-abortion person wants. They want it to be baby dies, fine, mom is harmed, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It probably what Moses meant, what we should understand this to be is, if mom is struck and baby comes out premature, it's a fine right away, because again, that's dangerous for mom or baby. But if there is harm to mom or baby, it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth, so on and so forth. So really, this passage does the exact opposite of what they want. I would argue it's a really strong defense of the equality, the equal value of mom and baby. Because if they're harmed, if they're endangered, fine. But if they're harmed, it's eye for eye, tooth for both of them. So another passage, again, fails to justify abortion and also is a bad way to read the Bible. And what we have to do, though, when we read this, is you have to recognize here the danger is when you get so attached to one translation, you could miss something pretty big. These are very different conclusions here based on what you're reading here. Now, I doubt many of us have, so if this few translations perhaps we're not using that maybe have miscarry there, but still it's a good benefit for us as we're students of the Bible to have multiple translations. So we are comparing because our English translations are not the inspired autographs. They are translations of copies of the original. So we want to be very careful not to assume that our version is the inspired one. It is a translation of God's inspired word. We have to be careful not to be too attached to that we miss the truth of what the authors actually originally wrote. Okay, ready for the third one? Or any clarifying questions or comments on Exodus? Yeah.
Just a question. Is there anything in the text that says where yet no harm occurred, whether that refers to the baby or the mom?
Let me look at it again. I believe it's not entirely. Let's look at it again together. Let me read this. Strive to hit a pregnant woman, so her children come out, but there is no harm. The one who hit her shall be fined, as the husband shall impose on him. He shall pay as judge determined. But if there is harm, pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It's not explicit. She's the one struck. Baby comes out. It is not explicit to me. The little reading I've done, one Hebrew scholar would argue this does apply to, I think it's Archer Gleason, I think is his name. He's the one who argued that this text points to the equal value of mom and baby. So I think he would say, I don't want to speak for him, I think he would say it's for either one, but I want to speak definitively on that. But I don't think it's explicit. Good question. All right. Well, go ahead. Were you raising your hand, Sally? I think because I never advanced my slides. Oh, it's not in here anyway. For the equal value. Equal value, yeah. Thanks for keeping me on track. All right, well, let's do the third one then. This third one is perhaps the most obscure that maybe you've read and maybe you have not. But I always know when I can have like this this really excited pro-abortion kid on campus when they know this passage, because this is very, very uncommon. So this is not a passage that many people spend their early morning devotions reading. People will come and say, have you ever heard about that time in the book of Numbers? Which again, that right there's your cue. What non-Christian reads Numbers, right? Not many. Have you ever heard of that time in the book of Numbers when God uses an abortion potion? And that one might raise your eyebrows quite a bit, right? You think, I got to go read my Bible better. They're referring to a passage, we won't read the entire thing, Exodus, that'd be funny. Numbers 5 verses 11 to 31. Let me again, you can open your Bibles if you like to, but I'm going to still read to you out of this one translation, but I want to summarize the passage because we're not going to read the entire section, all 20 verses. This is a passage where a man suspects his wife has been unfaithful to him. Now, he suspects her. He doesn't have evidence that she has cheated on him, or he might just be really jealous, and maybe she was guilty, maybe she was innocent. We don't really know, but he has, for some reason, he suspects her of unfaithfulness. And so what we see here in the book of Numbers is the man is to take his wife to a priest, and the priest is going to take a clay jar, add some dust, and then he's going to have this drink that the woman is going to drink. And we see in verse 27, here's what we read. She drinks this drink that he made with the water and dust from the floor, the ground. She drinks it. In verse 27, in the 2011 NIV, here's how it's written. If she has made herself impure and been unfaithful to her husband, this will be the result. When she's made to drink the water that brings a curse and causes bitter suffering, it will enter her, her abdomen will swell, and her womb will miscarry. Again, the same thing, the same idea. Her womb is miscarrying. Now, this is not two men fighting, unintentionally causing a miscarriage. The man believes his wife has been unfaithful. He takes her to the priest. The priest gives her this drink. Basically, they say, an abortion potion. She drinks the drink. She miscarries. So she was the guilty one, but God kills her baby. So clearly, in this case, God is punishing the baby for the mom's actions. God is killing the baby. And so if God blesses abortion this way by making an abortion potion, why is it wrong for a woman to take an abortion drug today, a pill that causes an abortion? That is the conclusion. So now again, I want to do the same two things. I want to first ask, what if they're reading this correctly? Would the way they've read this, the man goes to the priest gives the drink, the mom drinks the drink, the baby dies. If they're correct, would that justify abortion? And then secondly, is this a good way to, have they read the Bible well here? Are they reading it well, interpreting what is written here very well? So the first question, again, to summarize, here's their interpretation. God approves of abortion. The mom was unfaithful. It wasn't baby's fault, but God's judgment is meted out on the baby, not on the mom. And that's why the baby's killed by abortion. And so we too are justified if God kills babies. We too are justified in killing babies. Now, again, setting aside the interpretation question, what do you think of how if the priest gives the drink to the mom and that kills the baby, does that justify us in killing babies? What do you think? That's exactly it. Don's exactly right. It elevates us to God. So there's a hidden premise here, right? They're saying God caused an abortion, therefore we can do abortions. The hidden premise is we can do whatever God does, right? Now, we're going to get back to what God does in this passage in a moment, but just assuming they're right, they're saying God causes abortion, therefore we may do that. The hidden premise is we can do whatever God does. That's a wildly indefensible premise, right? God flooded the world. What if you don't like your neighbor? Should you flood their apartment? Clearly not, right? We're not justified doing anything God does. God is the creator of life, the author of life. He is justified in doing things we are not justified in doing. So even if God is doing something here, which, God is doing something in this passage. I disagree with how they read it, but if God is doing what they say he's doing, you can't get there from we can do what he does. God took the lives of the firstborn in Egypt. We are not justified in doing that. We are not God. So clearly this elevates us to God, and that is wrong. So already, yes, it clearly fails. God can do things. God is justified doing things we frankly are not, because we are not God. We are his creation. So again, another time that the Bible does not, even the way they've read it, doesn't justify what they want it to justify. So really, it makes it pretty weak here, right? They're not only reading incorrectly, but even the way they read it doesn't really do what they want it to do. So maybe they're arguing that God is justified taking life, but you can't get from there to we are justified in taking innocent life. That just does not follow. What about how they've read this? So we have the same problem here of this phrase, womb will miscarry. It's a little tricky to get around how to understand that. We have to do the same thing we did before, look at this and look at different translations to find out what is really going on here. There's a first important point to note here before we do that, and that is just that this is not an abortion potion. If you read the passage fully, which I know we didn't do tonight because we're summarizing here, but I did say, what happened when she drank it? If she's guilty, that version said she would miscarry. But I didn't read to you, what happens if she is not guilty? Go ahead and look at Numbers 5 if you don't have it open yet. The verse, verse 30. Yes, wait, thank you. All right, so, but if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and she shall conceive children. So an abortion pill is designed to work in a certain way. It attacks the connection between mom and baby starves and suffocates, baby dies. This drink doesn't do anything. She drinks it, but who is the one that actually issues the verdict here? God. It's not the priest. The priest prepares this as God intended. But if she's guilty, something happens to her, something bad happens to her. If she's innocent, something good happens to her. This drink is merely a neutral substance God is using to issue his verdict here. This is not an abortion drug that the priest has made through some ancient ritual here that is designed to kill the baby. It's merely a neutral substance he uses and that God then issues his verdict through. If the woman is innocent, nothing bad will happen. she'll actually be fruitful and multiply. But if she's guilty, something bad will happen. This is not an abortion drink designed to cause a problem. It is a neutral substance God uses to issue his verdict of whether she is innocent or guilty. So this is not an abortion potion. The way they read it is not correct. It is a neutral substance God will use to issue his verdict of guilty or innocent upon the woman. It's not the same as a drug designed with the very purpose of killing a baby. But then, what about this notion of what's happening with miscarriage? What do your translations say in verse 27? Anyone have here what yours says here in verse 27? What happens to her?
Her abdomen will swell and her thigh will waste away.
It's very odd, isn't it? Most translations say something very abstract like that, right? ESV, who has ESV? It's the same thing, basically, what Lisa just read. Her womb shall swell and her thigh shall fall away. Anyone have anything different in your translation? This is getting a hint. In that time, to be a curse among your people as a woman. Exactly, right? Barrenness. Yeah. Yeah, right. If she is guilty, sterility. If she's innocent, bear children. These are mirror images or opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So innocent, bear children. She did not cheat on her husband. She did not have an affair, commit adultery. If she's guilty, though, sterility. So opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, how exactly that happens? She's sterilized. Some versions have some pretty shocking language. The Complete Jewish Bible. Anyone read that here? Kind of doubt it. The Complete Jewish Bible says, her abdomen swells and her private parts shrivel up. It's pretty graphic and a terrifying notion here. Some commentators suggest there's a prolapsing happening here. Something's falling out of place, and that's why she is now barren and cannot have children. So she is being judged for her guilt if she is guilty of the crime, right? Now, interestingly, so most are pretty vague, like we read, like thigh, womb swelling, thigh falling away. But of all the translations on BibleGateway.com, there were 53 on there. Only 5 of them render it miscarrying. This is a pretty tiny minority of the text, at least on BibleGateway.com. Again, I'm not sure how representative that is, but a very small minority of those texts suggest or say that she miscarries. The most notable one is the 2011 NIV. If you have the 2011 NIV, it will say miscarry in there. My older 1984 one does not say miscarry that I have at home. But there are, so 5 say she miscarries. There are 4 that suggest she might. They say her womb shall discharge, but doesn't even explicitly say that a baby was discharged. Something else could be discharged from her body. Again, maybe the notion of prolapsing. So that's what happens. She is barren, which is a tragic thing, especially as we heard, she would be. It's an awful sentence, especially in that time. So that's what's going on here. So very few render it miscarry. More like what's happening is she is rendered barren in some way. Now, what's really interesting here, though, is we're all assuming here, at least a pro-abortion person is reading this, they're assuming there's a baby here. If you read the whole passage in its entirety, the baby's never mentioned. What is mentioned, though, in the very beginning is if the man suspects his wife is unfaithful but doesn't have evidence, he takes her to the priest. Now, if they've not been together and she's pregnant, that's evidence, right? So presumably, there probably is not a baby here at all. He merely suspects she's been unfaithful. If he sees she's pregnant and they've not been together, there is not going to be, if she is pregnant, they've not been together, there's evidence of her unfaithfulness, but that is not here. This is what happens when he does not have evidence and wants to take her to find out was she guilty or innocent. So what happens, likely there's no baby involved here that is being affected when the mom is rendered barren. What's also interesting here is that when I talk, this is very rare. I have time to go through all of this on campus with someone because they have to really be attentive to listen to this. But if you might go through it with someone, they would turn on a corner really quickly and say, well, okay, that's fine. Maybe it's not killing a baby then, but that means God is pretty awfully anti-woman because look at that. He's causing barrenness to her for merely, I don't know, expressing herself or something they might say, right? But I would argue, when I read this, if you understand it as we're interpreting it now, this shows God's high view of women and protection of women. So again, let's remember what's happening in this scene in Numbers 5. So the man suspects his wife's unfaithful. He's just jealous, thinks she might have been. He has reason to think she might have been, but no clear evidence. No one caught her, it says in this passage. He then takes her to the priest to find out. She drinks the drink, and the verdict is issued not by the priest, not by the husband, by God himself. Now, who knows if the woman was unfaithful? Who knows? Does the husband know? No, he doesn't know. He suspects. He's angry. He doesn't know. Does the priest know? No. Who knows? She knows, and God knows. Now, if you're in a society, very patriarchal society, you're brought before a tribunal of men, and the man says, my wife was unfaithful, and you say, I wasn't unfaithful. That's right, I wasn't unfaithful. So it sounded weird in my head when I said it. Who are they probably going to believe? The man. But God gave the women a way to be vindicated, because he's the one who issues a verdict, not men listening to the jealous, angry husband. God himself, who knows whether she was guilty or innocent, he issues a verdict and will either bless her with children or condemn her, punish her for her unfaithfulness. So this actually shows that God gave women a way to be vindicated in a time when it would have been very hard to be vindicated. So we come around full circle. The Bible is not pro-abortion. It is very strongly pro-baby and also pro-women. This notion that the Bible is anti-woman, the Bible suggests that we should have a lower view of preborn babies. Both of those ideas fail. And so, again, a third argument that I've heard from the Bible, fail in justifying abortion. To summarize back again, of the ones we've looked, I'll go through the rest of these here. So again, it's not an abortion potion, it's a neutral substance used by God to issue a verdict. The vast majority don't say miscarry, and if she's innocent, she'll conceive children. If she's guilty, it's probably sterility that's what is going on here when her womb swells and thigh falls away. So none of these three passages defend the claim the Bible is pro-abortion. In fact, they do the opposite. Even the way they've read the Bible, their own interpretation fails to justify abortion. And frankly, we should take this as an opportunity to learn how to better read the Bible ourselves. With the story of Adam, we must remember that genre matters. What type of text we're reading. We ought not read something in poetry and take it the same way we take a direct, you must do this or must not do that. There are rules for how you read poetry and understand it. It is not less relevant, less important, but there are rules for how poetry is understood. With the Exodus passage, we learn that we must be very careful not to only be attached to one translation. Compare translations. Your English translation might have an error. I grew up in a background that was very committed to one only, and that was a good translation, but not necessarily the best one. And if you stick with that one only, and you treat that as the inspired word of God itself, not as a translation of the inspired word of God, you may fall into some traps. And now here we read that sometimes there are things that are very confusing, but again, if you compare translations, you will probably find the answer. If you might have the 2011 NIV at home that says miscarry in Numbers 5, but if you compare it to another Bible, you're probably not going to see that. You'll see something else. Have you ever heard any other arguments from the Bible to justify abortion? People say, this justifies it. Those are the three most common ones I hear. You ever heard anything else? I'm just curious. The only one I hear is really argument from silence, which I mentioned in the beginning, right? Which is the Bible doesn't condemn abortion, which is true. I mean, so it's not true. The Bible doesn't mention abortion, that is true. The same way the Bible doesn't mention lynching someone, bombing an innocent village with a nuclear bomb. It doesn't mention those things explicitly. It condemns them by inference. The Bible is clear. All men are made in God's image, and it's wrong to kill innocent people. Thou shalt not commit murder is very, very clear, right? So the Bible clearly condemns these acts of killing by inference. Okay, well, any questions or comments on this in general, then yeah, go ahead.
Has anybody ever brought up Jephthah's story and how that might play a role in, I mean, it's not abortion, but there's, I guess, a corollary there.
I've never had anyone reference that to me. I think it's pretty clear that would be another narrative where we should not take this as the way. I mean, if you're not familiar with the story, he makes the vow to kill the first living being that comes out of his house as his daughter. He made a rash vow he should not have made. He should not have, when you make a vow, he should not have then broken God's law, right? He broke God's law by killing her. So there's more to that story, but even the narrative itself, again, is really important. Remember, it's not prescriptive for us. I think we all hopefully bear that in mind, right? We see our kids come right down the stairs like Christmas morning. We don't think about who we're going to kill, right? We naturally recognize this is not how we live our lives as parents. So I've not heard that.
Yeah,
That's
no, it's more
interesting.
of an open-ended question.
Yeah, yeah.
If anybody's ever tried to take that angle.
That would be new. They do. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on this, on the Bible interpretation? Yeah, Don.
When you run into these arguments, I mean, it seems like these people are locked in. Like they're
Yeah.
fully loaded. They've studied it. They're coming at you. Have you ever seen any signs of softness or cracking?
Yeah, I think that, well, there are still open-minded people. There are truth seekers, and I think that, unfortunately, I would say a lot of times when the Bible is referenced, when I'm doing outreaches on campus, it is not from good faith players. They are people who want to, like the opposite of the traditional Bible thumper. They're Bible thumping, but with the wrong purpose in mind, right? They want to smack you with the Bible to defend their liberal theology or their bad theology or their atheism, whatever it may be. But that's not always the case. I do recall, I can't remember where I was, maybe at Ohio State, when someone referenced the Exodus passage, and I just said, well, let's just read it together. Because I know that with the majority being not miscarry, being that the baby's born premature, let's read it together, right? And we opened the Bible and did, and he pretty quickly admitted, I guess I was wrong, right? Because usually, most likely stumble on a passage, on a translation that does not say miscarry, because the minority say miscarry. And so he was open-minded, said, yeah, I guess you're right. Now, he didn't say abortion's always wrong then, but he moved on that issue. And certainly I would say that I want to be very careful that not to be defeatist. I do often meet a lot of people who are not good faith players in conversation, but there are a lot of people who still are open-minded out there. And even they might move in a small increment, right? You might get them to recognize that abortion is generally wrong. They have not agreed yet that God is God, that Jesus is God, and that believing in him is how we're saved, but they're moving increments toward truth. Truth is contagious. You get some of it, you want more of it, right? And so there are still truth seekers out there. I do see that. And also those who are not good faith players, they're not really well studied in it. They're locked in what they believe. They don't have good reasons for it often. So that means if you do a little studying, you can pretty quickly correct it, right? Any other comments? Yeah, cool questions. I love that you use the word efficient, right? I have done other outreach efforts where I don't have any imagery there. It's very hard to convey in words. I mean, it's very simple, right? It's wrong to purposely kill innocent humans. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. It's our simple argument. But even there, I use several words, right? And then I have to defend how I know the baby's a human, how I know abortion kills her, which is pretty clear to us, we know, but it takes some time. And then people can still say, well, that's just your view, right? In a second, if I present the picture, they see the human, they see she was killed, and their conscience, which is often trying to be stuffed down by their worldview, comes to the surface and corrects their thinking. It's the most efficient method we have. And you're exactly right. I do see many people move when they see that. In the same way that I remember, I don't know if many of you remember this, we were living in Ohio, so it wasn't more than 15, 16 years ago when President Obama was still in office, and there were the sarin gas attacks in Syria, was it? Not Syria. Anyone remember where that was? Somewhere overseas. And they had imagery on TV of the kids who had died and just couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep that night. I was just so horrified by it because it conveyed to me this injustice, right? When we see injustice, it efficiently communicates the truth, right? So you're exactly right. I find that's very compelling. And it's why we share that, not because we have any joy in showing people ugly realities, but the evil happening to them is so great that we have to turn the people away from it. Yeah. Facebook, Instagram, or X. Oh, so if like you want to like look at our you could or YouTube. YouTube, it's if you go to YouTube, type create equal abortion, you'll easily find it. It's youtube.com/create equal films. You can see all of our videos on there. Instagram, and Facebook, it's facebook.com/create equal org or instagram.com/create equal org. Or if you email me, I'd be happy to send you the link directly to it. You can see all the videos on there. Yeah. Other questions, comments, thoughts about this? Yeah, we'll be there. I'll be there too. We'll have a team there. We have a jumbotron off the side of the march. It's always every year. I think there are some other events happening too that we'll be there for. But yeah, we'll be there. If you haven't been there, it's a pretty powerful event, the March for Life, where you have the massive throng of people there marching the street, people who oppose abortion. It's a powerful gathering of pro-life people. So that's just a couple weeks. So yeah. Well, thank you all. I'll pray as we close. But again, to summarize here, I think this should be the main takeaway. Two things. We want to be good students of the Bible. And the better you become at reading the Bible, the more easy it'll be for you to correct these ideas. It's not, abortion is the thing I know best, right? When it comes to these bad ideas. But people abuse the Bible to justify a whole lot of things. The classic example of this is, again, this whole study, the idea is called hermeneutics, how to interpret the Bible well. Greg Kokel from Standard Reason, a Christian apologetics organization, he has referred to a classic case of doing Bible reading poorly. One woman this is a true story, sadly a true story. She was married. She was wanting to have an affair. She opened the Bible and read the verse, put on the new man, took that as God telling her to put on the new man. Classic example how you ought not read the Bible. So it's not just abortion. It's a whole host of things. We have to be good students of the Bible that will help us to correct confusion out there and also grow in our own walk with the Lord. So hopefully as we take away from this, these interpretations all fail, but also we can not only correct them, but also we should pursue being better students of the Bible ourselves. Let me pray and then we'll close.